Well, good evening. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining me, choosing to join me again, spend a bit of time. And how are you? How's your day been? It's very lovely here in where we live in Devon, in UK. And oh yeah, say hi, everybody. Good to see you, Emma. Hi, Zoe. Yeah, I've actually got some sun, which is really lovely. We've had a lovely sunny few days. Well, I don't think it's going to last. This might be the extent of our summer. Who knows? But it's been a nice few days. And you know what? It really helps to improve the spirit and soul, doesn't it? To have a little bit of sun, I find. Great. So good to see you all. Thank you for saying hi as you come in. Won't be a particularly long one tonight. Famous last words. But I wanted to share a few thoughts with you on the topic of dealing with some challenging topics. Now, there's a lot of good information out there about navigating conflict and that kind of thing. I just wanted to kind of put my own little spin on it, really, looking at some of the psychology and just offering some thoughts. That's all. One of the questions I asked in the little write-up was, can we share our opinions without drama? So I can answer that now, and the answer is no. Doesn't matter how hard we try, there is always the potential for a little bit of drama, and that's because of the individual interpretation of what we're trying to say or do on the other side. Even, ironically, me doing this tonight has, it seemed, caused a bit of drama. So there you go. So we can't not, but we can think about ourselves, and that's what this is about. It's about you listening in, me, just how we navigate some of this stuff, how we think about these things, how we change our relationship with some of the feelings that we have regarding the importance of advocacy for us and how passionate we are about it. We're going to look at that. So anyway, good. It's good to see you all from all over. So that's great. We've got quite a few people in, so it's nice to see everybody. Now, in good old Sesame Street fashion, if you know Sesame Street, I was looking through and I was thinking about some things here. And I think tonight is brought to you by the number 3. And I'll explain that in a bit because everything seems to be in 3s. So yeah, in good old Sesame Street fashion, you can decide which one of Sesame Street I am. I did used to like Big Bird. She was one of my favorites. And Animal, of course, on the drums. We did look a bit of Animal. Good. And Fuzzy Bear, oh my God, I loved all of them. Sesame Street. God, I haven't seen Sesame Street for such a long time. And The Muppet Show. Okay, cool. Right, I'm going off on a tangent already. I will blame the medication I'm on. A big thank you again for those who are still reaching out and asking how I'm doing. I'm doing better. I've had some more positive test results back, and I'm having some, going to be starting some more positive treatment soon, hopefully. So thank you for that. It's great to hear from you and all those get well and thinking of your messages. Right, so this has come about because, again, you know, we see them, don't we? We see things unfold on Facebook, people kind of diving in with things, trying to, and I get it, because it's the passion that kind of drives that. And when we have very specific views that are almost on the absolute side of things, you know, that we can find ourselves putting in to these discussions. Some of them are quite heated. And I just wanted us to think about how we navigate that a little bit and how we can still think about trying to make the changes that we want to see about in a more positive, shall we say, or productive way. And this thing about the passion, it's the passion. So we learn things, right, and then we have our view maybe on, I'm going to share a few of mine today. This is going to be interesting. But you know, we think about some of the hot topics like, you know, balls, crates, head collars, dog sports, what to feed dogs, training in general, wider topics on methods and tools, different approaches, all these kind of things. It's our passion that gets us a bit fired up and gets us to think, oh no, well, that's not right, or, you know, you really should be looking at it this way or whatever. What I would invite people to think about is that's our passion, and that often drives our response. I want to come on to some of the psychology of that in a minute. But the big thing for me is, what is the purpose? What is the purpose of that comment that we intend to put? What is the purpose of that post? What is the purpose of that addition that we want to make to that particular debate? Because if we don't think about the purpose as well as the passion, we risk losing any impact on what we want to try and communicate. If you check out my little chat I did a little while ago, you can find it on the YouTube channel, supporting others to move from task to care. I'll go into this in a bit more detail, so have a check at that. But I just want to kind of touch on some psychology stuff, really, that kind of underpins this, and then we're going to look at some specifics. Now, this is why it's challenging, because we all have our own, what we call safe worldview, which is made up of our value systems and our belief systems. And our brain likes to protect that. And that's why we have our own biases and our own distortions and how we filter information. Now, this is important for us to remember for us, but it's also important to remember the person we're talking to will also have the same stuff going on. And if we think about how attuned the brain is to social rejection, I'm going to be talking a bit about this over on the CAM platform, Canine Arthritis Management, on Tuesday night at 7 o'clock, talking about social pain and social processing, that kind of thing in relation to pain. But when you think about that part of the brain and the work done by Matthew Lieberman at UCLA, which I reference a lot because I love his book called Social. That's a really good book to look at. But he has framed this as social evaluative threat, just how we're constantly evaluating our connection to or rejection from social interactions. That part of the brain, literally just saying to somebody, can I give you some advice, is likely to already set off some of those defense mechanisms. That's really important. And we have to be really mindful if we want to invite, and this is the word of the day. So we've got brought to you today by the number 3, come to that in a minute, and the word invite, because everything is an invitation, isn't it? I'm going to invite you to consider some stuff. It's an invitation, right? If I feel I'm going to tell you stuff and you need to hear it and you must change and you must think differently, that's problematic. It's problematic on many levels. One, because actually that's me being quite coercive and controlling, and also not referencing the other person's own lived experience and how hard it might be for them to take that information on, or where they are in their journey, or how big a leap that is. None of us woke up in the morning thinking, oh, dog-centered care approach. We just thought, that little bit makes sense, that little bit makes sense. And we build as we change and as we move away from our own indoctrinated connection to behavior and the societal norms and the kind of constructs around us that tries to define us. So not only is it quite coercive, that's one thing, but also it's likely to have the opposite effect. Nobody that I know of who has been shamed, had their mistakes pointed out, been schooled, been spoken to in quite an abrupt, combative way, has, in my knowledge, thought, oh yeah, sorry, you're right. Oh yeah, I'll change. They're not gonna. They might change in the moment because they don't want any more of that. So they look like they are. And this is very relevant when we're working with clients. So it's an invitation, right? So we have our kind of safe worldview built on those value and belief systems. Now, for me, I think this is where it's a bit tricky. We can communicate and discuss easier with somebody with different belief systems. So beliefs are what we believe to be true, often with very little knowledge, with very little fact, actually, just because somebody told us, our parents or whatever else. And this includes our belief about ourselves, by the way. That's why I love talking about this stuff from an emotional safety point of view for us professionals, because a lot of our own version of self has actually been pre-programmed by other people's expectations and judgments and narratives, and it detaches us from our true sense of self. So even our belief system in self is often foundated in the narratives of others. So our belief system, what we believe to be true, our value system is what we feel is important. And this is why we can have discussions with people whose belief systems might be different, but we find it very hard to have discussions with people whose value systems are different. And I use this as a bit, oh, hello to my husband who is in the chat. He's on his break at work. Bless him. Hello, Kieran. So this is why. So I think about my parents then. My father, he was on a political leaning side, a conservative. My mother was a liberal. They got on because whilst their belief systems might be a little bit different politically, their value systems were the same. They both really wanted to elicit good social change. My father just happened to have more of a slightly right of centre view of it, and my mother had more of a left of centre view of it. If my father happened to be a Trump-esque conservative, I don't know, not bringing politics into it, but my mother probably wouldn't have engaged anything with him because their value systems would have been different. And this is what I think we find hard sometimes when trying to talk to aversive trainers, for example, because our value systems are often different, because our value system is more attuned to potentially the emotional and physical well-being of the dog. So anyway, so we have to think about this. This is really important then. It's the same for us. We have our own judgments of the world. We are designed to judge. Our brain wants to make a quick judgment, cognitive appraisal through that instant filter of our belief and value systems and our safe worldview without having to have to think about it. And it doesn't want to have to reappraise much. So it feels very challenged too. It's hard. So the first thing we have to bear in mind is how we change our own relationship with our own feelings around judgment. So we can't not judge because our brain wants to judge. But we don't have to have that judgment drive our response. And that's the difference between judging and being judgmental, and having the judgmental be the thing that drives our response. In one of the threads I saw the other day, which kind of got me thinking about this, there's so many judgments and assumptions made about the person who wrote the initial post. It was pretty outrageous, I thought, especially because I know the person, so those judgments based on very thin information were driving lots of really unhelpful responses, which then dilutes the message that the commenter wants to make to put those things across. So this is important for us that we recognize this, not just for us, but also those that we do seek to influence. That includes our clients, if you're a professional, how we work with them, recognizing they will have the same mechanics that we do. Their brain wants to defend their own view of stuff, and they don't like necessarily somebody saying you're doing it wrong, or actually there's something different. I remember working with a client once with a lady who really got torn with stuff, and I try and do things as best I can in a very supportive way. I can talk about that in a second. But for this lady, I could see the inner conflict in her, because this lady had had dogs all her life and had a set worldview about dogs that was pretty set in, concrete, really. And just by our joint observations about her dog and bringing in some of these thoughts, you could see that foundation breaking for her. In front of my very eyes. So much so, at one point, she said, I can't deal with this. She left the room and she locked me into this room in her house. Went outside, I could see her lighting up a cigarette outside, so she's having a fag, doing a lot of heavy breathing. And then I was thinking, right, this is different because I'm now locked in somewhere. And then once she'd had a bit of a fag, she came back in, took a deep breath and said, I'm really sorry about that. You're right. I see it. It's just really hard for me to kind of see this stuff. So it just shows, even in the moment, even in a short amount of time, how people can really feel very deeply about that shift that's going on. A lot of the time, thankfully, we invite people to think about things over a period of time, so it's not quite so. But that was quite a big reaction from her, and one of the many things that I've experienced. I'm sure many of the trainers in this room can talk about their own. It's kind of confessions of a dog trainer stuff, isn't it, really, the things that we go through. Okay. So we have to understand the stuff for ourselves then, and also when working with the client, but also the stuff we put on social media. So I said about the kind of bringing this by the number 3, and there's a few things I want to talk about in the way of thinking about this in the way of 3s. So when we have a view on something, the first thing to bear in mind is that is our view, and that is our view to engage within those that we have direct influence over, and that's our own dogs, right? So for me, there's 3 entities. The first 3 entities we want to think about. The first is us. The second is our clients if we work professionally, and the third is our social media advocacy side of things. Those are the 3 different things we have to be mindful of when we're thinking about trying to influence others about what our opinion is, and also about a certain mindset or point of view. So the first thing is us, out of those 3. So let's take head collars. Let's go into something like head collars. I would never use a head collar on my dogs. Like, that's it. And I would not want anybody else who is in care of my dogs to also use a head collar on them. That is my right, because they're my doggies, they're my family, and that is the sphere of influence that I can most directly control. So that is non-negotiable. The second entity that I have to think about head collars is my client that I might work with. This is where I have to learn to start thinking about negotiating some of this stuff, because I genuinely believe, remember, this is my opinion, as we know, that causes drama, but my opinion is I have to meet my clients where they are. I just have to. If they're already using a head collar, I have to meet them where they are, and I have to think about, and I'll come on to another thing in a moment about how we navigate that, but I also have to think about them and their opinion and their worldview, and why they think they need the head collar and what they think it does and what it does for them. I also have to be mindful that I'm not being overly ableist about it, because I can handle the dog without one, but they might not be able to for whatever reason. There's lots of different reasons, part of their worldview, their safe worldview, that means that they're attached to that tool. So I have to think about then, I can say, as part of my side of things, whilst I'm handling the dog, whilst we're together, we're going to think about using a different tool. This is the same for when I work with clients who have got prong collars, shock collars, choke chains, anything. I've got a client that I was working with towards the end of last year, and who had a prong collar. My first thing was not, we're going to get rid of the prong collar. My first thing was to find out why it's being used, what she thinks happening, and then to introduce things. This brings me on to my other little power of 3 here. This applies to working with our clients and also social media and advocacy. The 3 steps for me here is, the first is that I must recognize, or try to recognize and acknowledge, the reasons why they have their view in the first place. This is what I said. This is the same thing I do when I look at a social media post. Before I think about commenting or not, I think, right, how can I recognize and acknowledge the reasons why they might think that, even though it might be a view that's different to mine. Then the second thing I do is to offer and put that in the comment if I'm making a comment, or to the client, learn that from them and acknowledge it and say, I get that, I get it. I get why you're using it, and I get why you think it's helpful. The second thing is for me to offer the science, the mindset approach, to provide the invitation to think about things differently, why it might be relevant for them to consider it, evidence-based that, including my observations if I'm in person, or anecdotes if it's written. And then the third thing in that little number 3 thing is to offer a potential route map for them that is doable. So with the prong collar then that the lady was using, again, I said, look, when we're together, I want to introduce a harness for your dog. I want to show you this, I want to show you that. And whilst I'm with the dog, I'd like us to use these tools. I didn't say to her, you must use them. I just wanted to make sure that when we're together, I can stay comfortable myself, but also show that invitation about how things go. Over time, the client started to use the other tools more and more and more, until I had a wonderful email saying, you know what, the prong collar's gone in the bin. That was her journey, and she had to make it. Because if we end up diving in too much early on, same on social media, we lose people. And especially with clients, because, short of me moving in with them, I don't know what they're going to do when I'm not there. So you'll get a client who will put the harness on when you're with them, but they're going to stick to what they feel is right for them, because their worldview is still the same. And especially if we've gone about it in a way that makes them feel a bit of shame or guilt, deliberately so, they're likely to feel that anyway. As people have known, I've spoken about guilt before, because I think guilt's an important part of the learning process, and that's how I frame it for my clients. I never say to a client, don't feel guilty. I say the opposite. I say that feeling you're having right now, that means you've learned something really deeply and viscerally. And we have two options with that feeling. We either stay chained to the past with it, and that's really not a great place to be, because we can't go back in time. We can't go back and not use it. Instead, though, we can change our relationship with that feeling and what it really means for us moving forwards, and recognizing that it's a great driver to change our response and think, you know what, I might have done it then, but with what I know now, I won't do it again. I won't move forward. So actually, it detaches us from the past. So guilt can be a positive thing if we allow it to, because we have a choice every moment of every day about what we do next. Don't have to get repeated into the cycle of making the same things, and definitely didn't want to be stuck in that emotional connection to the past about something we can't change, and lose the opportunity to change the present that we can. So ourselves, then, we are in control of our own lives and our own doggies, and what we do or don't do there. With our clients, I believe we have to meet them where they are. Same is with when we're looking at social media and advocacy, especially if somebody's already written a comment or a post. We have to think about what's our purpose. Now, if our response is, you're wrong, crates are bad, head collars are bad, period, whilst we think we're trying to help, we're likely to have already lost them now. They've lost them. And they're not going to make a change, or they say something like, they're going to think, oh yeah, thanks for that. Because they're already thinking, oh, I feel really uncomfortable by this now. Rather than thinking about those three things, recognize why they might use it. Offer the science for sure, because we know that they're not great. We know that all these things, that have some cons there. But my late mother used to have a saying, which people might have heard me mention before, which is, there's no absolutes but kindness. And I think for us, we should make that, there's no absolutes but welfare. And welfare extends both ends of the lead, of course. And I think we have to be careful, cautious of absolute messaging for people who have a bit of a journey to go from there to there. We have to remember that, a lot of these things, crates, head collars, feeding dogs, whatever, it's been heavily indoctrinated into the general public for quite a while now. It's a relatively new thing, probably only the last 30 or 40 years, but it's been indoctrinated. They're like, yeah, well, these are just normal things. I never really questioned it before. So to make them have a leap to suddenly think, oh, actually, there might be a different story, can be very challenging for them because of the mechanics we were talking about a minute ago. Another little thing of the power of three. Anybody's heard me talk on my emotional health workshops and that, and I've got a new one coming up soon, which is a new redone one, actually. But anyway, it's important to remember that for me, there's kind of three of me here. There is my cognitive, present Andy self. There's also my very heavily defensive, cautious, a little bit paranoid part of my brain. And people have heard me say I like to name mine, and mine's called Bob. And Bob's been with me all my life, and I have to be kind to Bob, and Bob just wants to keep me safe. But Bob has been formed through my experiences, formed through my trauma. Bob is very emotionally driven, very quick to act, not always in presence of the facts. There's a saying in human psychology, feelings are not facts always. And so I have to be mindful of Bob. The third bit of our internal trinity is our ego. We all have an ego, and our ego is that part of us that wants to be seen, right? Wants us to be put out. I read something really interesting recently about imposter syndrome, and it was really cool. And I must try and share it in the group. I'll try and find it again. And this psychology is talking about Bob and the ego, really, I guess. But we can see imposter syndrome, which is a bit of a catch-all term, I know, but as being quite a humble thing, I'm not good enough, so and I don't feel good enough, and I'm going to get caught out and going to get found out. But he was saying maybe it's, and that's kind of Bob talking right there, maybe it's also because that side of us is also in tussle with our ego, which is actually I'm good enough, and I do, and why aren't I being seen? And I can't cope with not being seen. And that's that social rejection thing again. And I think that's quite interesting because the ego bit is something that's hard for us to necessarily admit to. That maybe there's a big part of us that drives us to think, well, actually, my work is important. So why am I seeing tumbleweed when I post something, or that kind of thing? So interesting. So again, we have a problem if our passion, our advocacy gets driven by our Bob, or driven by our ego, or both. And a lot of the fallout we see on social media is just lots of people's Bobs shouting at each other. Because Bob's not very good at hearing, especially when Bob's off on one. Same with our ego. And we can, though, we have to be more conscious of this. And it takes work. That's the point. We have to, because we have to be mindful of those parts of us, and we can change our relation. I say that a lot because that's what we do. It's not about not feeling. It's not about dismissing. It's just changing our relationship with Bob, changing our relationship with our ego, not letting those responses drive our behavior. And it does take a bit of practice, because actually being more mindful about stuff, there are those who want to dismiss this as being a bit snowflakey. But actually, for me, it's the highest version, the highest pinnacle of the human essence. Because anybody can just respond based on Bob, because that's our chimp brain, right? Chimp Paradox, great book. Anybody can just let our ego run away with us at the exclusion of all others. That's easy to do. What's harder is to think, okay, I'm feeling quite angry here, or uncomfortable, or triggered by this comment, but I can change my relation with that and think about how I respond, and think about the purpose of my response. If the purpose of my response is to tell somebody to F off, then that's fine, because they probably will. But if my purpose really is to think, actually, I'm here in a professional capacity on social media predominantly, it's not on my personal timeline, it's on other things. My purpose is to try and influence change, and we really can, because I look at Dog Centre Care as a platform. I don't have to worry about challenging other people's comments or posts. I just need to cast the light that I want to cast. Some people will be dazzled and blinded by it and not like it, but other people will find warmth in it, and that's the key. And I think about Dog Centre Care, about how myself and all the other wonderful people that contribute, many of you listening now, all the wonderful people that come and speak, it sows seeds. When I was really quite poorly a couple of months ago, and the messages I was getting, people saying, do you know what, I heard that and it really made me think about things. Because guess what? It was an invitation. I try not to educate myself in a way that says, you must think like this. It's a case of, here's some stuff to think about. And we find our own way through. If we're particularly combative and pointy fingery, and quite highbrowy and schooling-y, it doesn't help, I don't think. And especially when we think about supporting clients, that I've talked about another set of three, the 3 A's: awareness, acknowledgement, acceptance. My role is to help support their awareness of what might be a different view for them of their dog. And then I need to support them to acknowledge it. And that has challenges, of course. And that's the thing that we have to help them navigate from. How do I help them to truly acknowledge it? They might be more aware of it now, but how do they acknowledge it? And that's where a lot of barriers are there. That's where guilt can be a big thing that stops acknowledgement. And then acceptance, because acceptance is the best place to accept that, yeah, that's the case. But we have to do those 3 A's for ourselves as well. And I think that's important for us. One thing we also have to be mindful of is this notion, if we're not careful, this is what I saw on the post of a colleague of mine, somebody I've known for a long time and who I deeply respect, and who was being very much misrepresented, I felt. But I have the benefit of more knowledge about them. And that's something else for us to think about sometimes. If you don't know the person very well, we have to change our relationship a little bit with some of those instant judgments, because we're taking on very thin information. But we can easily fall into the trap of othering. Othering is one of the most dangerous qualities of us humans. Our political classes use it. We go to war over it. Our religious dogma thrives on it. Somehow you are other to me. Now, if we think about it evolutionary, this is part of the byproduct of becoming more social, I feel, because there's a lot of stuff written on this stuff, I know. But if you think about it, if I've got my little family unit and I'm going to start connecting to another family unit, and we're going to start looking at being social and having cooperative care and all these other factors, it doesn't come without risk. And so this is why social engagement and social processing can be difficult and challenging. And there's a lot of things that, if we don't feel safe there, and now the brain's like, this isn't right. And othering is really about our brain seeking the us amongst the them. And that would have been important back along, but obviously we are able to see beyond that if we allow ourselves. But in a primal way, we're still kind of programmed to other. You're other than me. You're other than me. And that could be quite dangerous. So this is the problem again with thinking about what we do with our message. So I don't, and I wouldn't use crates, for example. But that doesn't mean that I want to other people who do. And definitely, if I want to try and invite them to consider why there might be other options, I have to think about how I would do that in a way that would make sense to them, not other them and think, well, you're other to me. I think being a member of the LGBTQ community, I'm very aware of that. And it makes me feel very uncomfortable that I see it's happened so much. Even aversive trainers who use shock collars and that thing, I try not in my head to other them as an individual. I try and focus on the fact that I really want to try and put out stuff about what they do and what they're doing, recognizing that their own belief system and worldview is different to mine. With going back to the dog centered care platform, I get several aversive trainers reach out every month. Because they've found the content, they've already started to feel different. They haven't been convinced by positive training necessarily about how to do tasks differently, but when they've thought about things differently from a more care-oriented point of view, they start to have things unravel. And I've spent many hours talking to people. There are many people in the group. There might be people in this chat room now where we've had those conversations, and that's great. But that's the way to do it. I can't. I feel that it's no point me going in and trying to evangelize to people in the hope that they will come over, because it's a hard job, and my own emotional health means more to me than trying to do that. So othering is something we've talked about. The other thing as well that's been worth remembering is the writing reflex. And I talk about this a fair bit as well. It's the kind of slightly darker side to empathy, really, is this feeling that somehow we get driven to somehow put things right. I must put this right. I must put this post right. I must put that person's opinion right. I must put their point of view right. And this is what causes a lot of the stuff we see on social media where people pile in on somebody else because they see one of their friends or colleagues who they perceive as being misrepresented or whatever. So they have to go and make it right, of course, so they dive in. This is something we have to be mindful of with our clients. With our clients, there are two really important things I think we have to bear in mind as behavioral practitioners or trainers. The first is we are not there to take on the burden of others. We're not there to do that. Secondly, we're not there to put things right. But a lot of people, I think, do take on those. They do take on the burden and they do try and put things right. But for all the things we're discussing now, it's really hard to do that. You know, we cannot be responsible for final outcomes ultimately, especially on behavioral stuff, because for me, there's too many variables there. We try and support best outcomes, and that's that supporting the client to go from awareness, acknowledgement to acceptance, because best outcomes come from acceptance. I accept that my dog is stressed. I accept that you know, these situations need to change, and that's when we can really make progress. But we can't make that happen. And I think this thing about taking on the burdens of others, it's really hard, right? When we're empathetic and we care deeply, so we have to work at that. We have to work at that. So when we think about these topics, then. And especially when we see in our community the tendency to want to methodize, create a little bit of celebrity stroke, dare I say, cult-like thing around certain things that become, rather than adding in things to broaden toolkits, get sold as the toolkit. Because that indoctrinates all those professionals then. So anything that comes out of that that kind of method or that mindset, they feel compelled to have to go and put people right. And I think this is a problem and a bit of a challenge, and because some of this methodizing can create, without meaning to, maybe it does, I can't say that, but I think without meaning to, an absolutist lens. No crates, no balls, no head collars, no whatever, rather than it being an ideal outcome to work towards. There's a slight difference there, especially if in the approach when we start trying to tackle these topics online. So there you go. I just wanted to share that. These are my thoughts. I don't know on these things, because for us to invite you to consider our responses, your responses to stuff, and to keep staying in mind, what is our purpose? If my purpose is to ensure as many dogs do not wear a head collar as possible, as many dogs don't end up in a crate as possible, to make sure as many dogs don't play with a ball as possible, whatever my outlook is, then if that's truly the purpose, we need to be really mindful about what's driving our responses in order to get that purpose, and to recognize that we have to try and find ways of trying to shift the dial more in that direction, because otherwise we can end up not only alienating those that we want to try and influence, but also burning out ourselves in the process because we feel it's such an uphill task. So I think it's more healthier to think, actually, my task is not, my purpose is not to do this, and this. My purpose is to keep finding different ways to touch people in a way that makes them think about their own mindset towards behavior. That's what I look at doing, because I think if you do that, especially that shift from task to care, a lot of this other stuff falls into place. Remember, no absolutes but welfare. I think that's not a bad way of looking at it. So take crates. I think, when we think about recognizing those three things, recognizing and acknowledging why people might use them, I think that's important. We should recognize that. So yeah, I get it. And then we need to offer the science about why that can be problematic for dogs, and the things that we need to really consider about. and then offer that potential route map for people that remember, it's a route map, which should have lots of stops along the way, but they shouldn't feel that if they can't get to that final destination, it's somehow a failure. The fact that they've moved along the map is great for that dog. So, for example, head collars. I might say to a client, okay, your dog's wearing a head collar. We've got to be mindful of this, this, and this. So I've already recognized, acknowledged why they might be using it. Then I'll tell them some of the things got to recognize. I might invite them to shift to one that I feel is more humane. So, like the dogmatic, for example, which is kind of based on a horse's bridle and has a padded bit. Maybe have the harness, double-ended lead, clip to the harness, clip to the head collar. So most of the weight's on the harness and less on the head collar now. That's part of that potential route map for them. Even if they ended up there and they're not just having a gentle lead or a Holtie that rides up into the dog's eye and they're attached to the head collar and it's yanking the head back all the time. Even if they've shifted to double-ended lead, harness, dogmatic, that is a shift for them, and the dog's welfare is improved. No absolutes, but welfare. So that's the important thing about it. The same with well, with all these things, we can look at all these things and think about the same thing about moving along. So, for example, if somebody's using a crate, if they use their crate less, if they recognize that maybe the dog, so many of my clients have got so used to using a crate because the dog's had it since a puppy. I'm like, well, for me, it's a bit like a child, that point when you think, you're older now, so you can have a front door key, you can have your friends around, I don't have to be there when your friends come around, all the kind of things we need to do the same for doggies. So so we can think about that. We can offer those route maps. Remember, the absolute bit is us. That's the bit that we can be absolute about. And with our own dogs, we can then negotiate that a little bit. We can negotiate some of that outlook with clients and social media and the advocacy we do. So that's it then, really. That's what I wanted to share with you. And for everybody here to think, when you go away tonight, what is your purpose? So we all want to kind of promote positive methods. We all want to move people to thinking, especially within the ethos of the dog centre care group, to seeing behaviour more about the individual dog in front of us and what we can learn. I've got my dog-centered care mantra: learn, support, teach. Learn from the dog, support what you've learned, teach things that are likely to be intrinsically valuable for that dog. And then after that, you can train what you like. Some of this has been captured as though it's somehow an anti-training movement. And again, I know some colleagues have that view, but I think some of it is semantics, because I see some of the things that people pitch as being different training. And I think it's just a different thing, really, because the dog's still learning stuff. And but I think it's okay to have that stuff, but we do have to think about the journey that other people have to go on. And that's what I've tried to do with dog centre care, really. Okay, great. So thank you for listening in. I hope that was kind of interesting and not too controversial, is it? I said in one of my lives before, and it really resonated with a few people because they quoted me on it, but it really shouldn't be this hard. Shouldn't be this hard. Yeah, I see that. Oh, I love this, Linda. I was going to mention this. So, Linda, how to move people into action to change our animal welfare laws. Being nice hasn't worked this far. Yeah, I hear you. And actually, there's a difference between being nice and being kind, by the way, in my opinion. Nice is actually about pleasing and people pleasing often. Kind is about not wanting to add in more conflict or drama. So, for example, if somebody says something not very nice about me online, which happens quite a lot, by choosing not to reply to that, that's actually me being kind. It's not being nice, it's just being kind, because there's no point. But I agree with you, Linda. I agree. Ultimately, we have to look at ways of changing legislation. That is the only way, ultimately, that a dial can be shifted, mainly because with aversive training especially, and some of the things that are welfare based. So, for example, let's go back to crates. Let's just face it. I wouldn't use crates myself, but if somebody puts their puppy in a crate for half an hour, they go and do the ironing, it's just not the end of the world. Dog who's left in a crate all day, welfare problem. Somebody throwing a ball for a dog a couple of times, not very far, not the end of the world. somebody throwing it, so that dog ends up becoming anaerobic, it starts putting huge pressure on the internal system. Listen to Amber Batson talk about this stuff. It's a welfare problem. You know, using a slip lead for my colleagues who do gun dog work, where they're taking the dog from A to B and the dog isn't choking on it, and it's just a tool to get from A to B, so the dog doesn't have to wear a collar, which is likely to get caught somewhere. It's not the end of the world. A dog who's pulling down the road, literally being choked to death, it's a welfare problem. So the way we really ultimately get the minimum levels of this stuff, especially moving away from aversive training, is by changing legislation, because aversive training has normalized the role of pain and fear as a training method. In the same way, hitting kids with sticks, like giving them the cane, corporal punishment, normalized that back then. Smacking kids was normalized as a way of punitive kind of discipline. When I hear people say, well, I was smacked as a kid and it never did me any harm, there's the harm right there, isn't it? I think that's something, you know, I shared in some of my talks about me having the cane when I was at school, part of my story. Right there. So, you know, and I'd say anybody under probably 30, you know, we used to hit kids with sticks on their bum, often with their trousers down. And that was, I'm not that old, wasn't that long ago. And we legislated against that in different formats so that it broke people away from that kind of intergenerational trauma and regurgitation of the normalization of it. So that is the case, but we have to think about what our purpose is and how we keep shifting the dial as best we can. We should never lose sight of the micro when we have a bigger goal of the macro. So anybody who's followed my story with trying to get a home with a wonderful cow, I went to a lot of effort there with Cal to advocate for him, find the right home, support him, do everything I need to do. That's just one dog who has been freed from not the best past. For him, it means everything to him. You know, when we put our stuff out, you know, Linda, your book, there's going to be thousands and thousands of people that you will never meet and never hear where that shift has happened for them. And then that has a knock-on effect, and that has a knock-on effect. So I think we have to think about our purpose. But the most important thing is that I really wanted to stress really is we can't make people do stuff. We just can't make them because they either will or they won't. And they are more likely to do things in a way when they have a mindset towards it, their own belief and value system that's kind of shifted. You know? Everybody's doing amazing stuff. And there's a great quote, I can't remember who it is from now, but just to know one life breathed easier because you existed is success. Is a reason to celebrate your life on this planet. So Andy, question. Andy, please would you be able to talk around the situation in a large group where there are a mixture of guardians on their journey? Would education take precedence? I think I love that, Zoe. I think for me, when I give talks to the general public, I always start by acknowledging how we're all kind of indoctrinated into a lot of societal norms already. I think that goes with that's an important thing to get them to already think about themselves. Because and actually also to understand that maybe some of our own beliefs about stuff aren't necessarily ones that we've evidence-based ourselves. It's just because other people have told us. You know, we've read that dogs are dominant. We've read that dogs must be put in their place. We've seen the guy on the telly. We were brought up like that. And then to kind of mirror that with ourselves, actually. Because there's three universal things that I talk about a lot that connect us all, whether you're an animal or a human, and that's to feel heard, to feel safe, and to get relief. Many people don't feel heard. They're in relationships, they don't feel heard. They don't feel heard at work. Society, they don't feel heard. They don't feel safe, for sure. We've all felt that. And and struggle to find relief, because if you can't communicate your emotional, physical, mental, social needs, then you have to settle for a conformist version of that. Most people get that. So it's not a big leap now to think, well, maybe the dog's the same, actually, and we have to think about stuff. It's much better to move people along slightly than to try and sell them big visions at the end. And I think that's something we've got to be mindful of on our side of the fence, where we're very passionate and very empathetic, and that passion can often drive our response. So good to see you all. Thank you for tuning in. Just to let you know, got a few things to let you know about. Thursday the 16th, we've got the wonderful Stephanie coming in. Stephanie co-wrote the book with Tude Rigas on how to raise a puppy. We're talking puppies and adolescent dogs. Then we've got Victoria Cooper coming in the following week, following Wednesday, talking about doodle mixes and why we need to be really mindful about their individual potential challenges, of course. And anybody who works in grooming, behavior, veterinary, we see these challenges actually, and how unprepared many of the caregivers are, especially with some of the received wisdoms around dogs and who they are and what they need, really don't fit these wonderful doggies. Then we got Wendy Sunshine coming in on Wednesday the 29th, looking at a lot of the evidence around different parenting styles and humans, and how Wendy's kind of looks at that, especially with her new excellent book, which we'll be talking about as well. And then we've got Matt Beisner coming in on the 6th of June, and then Susan Clothier, and that'll be a kind of a bit of a dog CC special, because whilst I've got Susan, I really want to stick with her, so we'll probably have a couple of hours together. Also, next weekend starts our special season of working of Barks. So this is Sindor Pangal and all the wonderful people from Barks, many of whom have spoken in the group separately. Saujanya, Sarabi, we've got Anushri, we got is it Eva? It is Eva, yeah, coming in as well. I'm really excited about this. So Barks are going to be kind of taking over the group over the coming months, really. It starts next weekend, Saturday and Sunday, and it's 2:00 UK time, because that's how we're going to manage the time zone with India and America and everything else. So both the first two are going to be round tables with everybody. We're going to really think about the wonderful stuff that's coming out of Barks and Sindor and her wonderful students and colleagues, and from that kind of part of the world, really. I think it's really important that we shine light on a lot of the wonderful richness that's coming out of there. And then we're going to have individual presentations from the individual people on topics of their choice, including case studies. So it's going to be a really good educational thing, so we can really look at the finer detail as well as the kind of theory, if you like. And then at the end of that, we're going to all get together again, and we're going to look at some of the really challenging topics that we're talking about now, and how we look at these things. I'm really excited about that, a Bark season coming in the group. Okay, great, good. Thank you, everybody. Have a good rest of the weekend. If you're in the UK, make the most of the sun while we've got it. And I hope that was what you thought it was going to be tonight, and some food for thought. And yeah, please take care, look after yourself. I might see some of you tomorrow for the joint workshop with Lord Donaldson. You can still access that now if you want to. It's just 40 quid, $50. And that's for me and Laura, about 5 hours worth of content, including free access to one of Laura's trauma workshops as well. We're going to be looking at the stuff that we need to really understand the mindset shift, so we're better at being able to communicate it to others. I think that's really important. We just wanted to give a flavour of some of the work that we've done before, and also some of the stuff that's normally only available at conferences and that kind of thing. So, okay, great. Well, lots of love, and